Have you ever watched a movie in Dolby Atmos and thought, why doesn't this sound as good as I remember? You've got the 4K disc, you've got the latest remaster, you've got Dolby Atmos, you've got a modern AV receiver and speakers everywhere. On paper it should absolutely destroy that old DVD you bought 20 years ago. But sometimes I actually prefer the DVD. And no, I'm not saying DVDs have better sound than 4K Blu-rays or Dolby Atmos. I'm saying something much more interesting. Sometimes the original theatrical audio mix simply sounds more natural, more aggressive, and more like the movie I remember. And that's where we get into what I call the Atmos Trap. What is the Atmos Trap? Let's get one thing straight. Dolby Atmos is an incredible format. When it's done properly, it can be spectacular. You can have helicopters flying overhead, rain falling around you, explosions filling the room, and subtle ambient sounds coming from completely different directions. It's immersive, it's impressive, and sometimes it's exactly what a movie needs. But here's the trap. More channels don't automatically mean better sound, and more speakers don't automatically mean a better mix. Because we're not just listening to technology, we're listening to a mix, and the way a movie was originally mixed for the cinema can be just as important as the format it's delivered on. Think about some of those DVDs from the late 90s and early 2000s. You put the disc in, select Dolby Digital 5.1, and that's it. No object-based audio, no Atmos. No massive collection of audio options. Just the theatrical mix that was designed to put you in the cinema. And then there's something about those mixes that I really appreciate. They're often direct. Dialogue is clear. Music has presence. Effects have impact. And when something explodes, it explodes. There isn't necessarily an attempt to make every little sound occupy a different position in the room. Sometimes the mix is simply focused on telling the story, and that can be incredibly effective. But haven't audio formats improved? Of course they have. A modern lossless soundtrack can give you much higher fidelity than a compressed Dolby Digital track found on the DVD. Dolby True HD and DTS HD master audio can sound fantastic, and Atmos can add another layer of immersion on top of that. But there's an important distinction. Audio quality and audio mixing are not the same thing. You have a technically superior format carrying a mix that you personally don't enjoy as much, and that's where some modern remixes divide movie collectors. When the mix changes the experience. Imagine when you've got a classic action movie. You remember watching it on DVD. The gunshots are sharp, the explosions have weight, the soundtrack kicks in and fills the room. Then years later you buy the 4K. You sit down, you switch Atmos on, and sometimes it feels different. Maybe the surround effects are more noticeable. Maybe there's more activity happening around you. Maybe the dialogue has been cleaned up. Maybe the bass has been changed. Maybe the dynamic range is different. And technically everything might be more sophisticated. But somehow it doesn't feel like the same movie. That's because your memory isn't just remembering the picture. It's remembering the sound. The danger of improving a classic. This is something I've talked about before when discussing modern 4K remasters. There's a temptation to look at an older movie and think, we can improve this. Clean up the picture, remove the grain, change the colour grading, make the image sharper, and perhaps give the movie a brand new audio presentation. But there's a fine line between restoring something and reinterpreting it. If the original theatrical mix still exists and is perfectly usable, why not preserve it? In fact, this is one reason I love editions that give you both options. Give me the new Atmos mix. Absolutely. Let me experience the movie in a modern home cinema, but also give me the original theatrical mix. Let me decide. Compression isn't always the enemy. Now here's where things get controversial. DVD audio is compressed. Dolby Digital isn't lossless. So why would anyone prefer it? Because compression isn't the only factor determining whether a soundtrack sounds good, the original mix, mastering, dynamics, EQ and overall presentation can matter enormously. A well-balanced Dolby Digital 5.1 track can still sound fantastic, especially when you're watching an older movie that was originally designed around that type of presentation. It's a bit like vinyl versus digital music. I'm not saying vinyl is technically more accurate, I'm saying people sometimes prefer the way it sounds. The same principle can apply to movie soundtracks. Dynamic range matters. Here's another big one. A soundtrack can be incredibly loud and still lack impact. What makes an explosion exciting isn't simply how loud it is. It's the contrast between the quiet moments and the loud moments. Quiet dialogue, silence, a little bit of music, then boom. That's dynamics. And some older theatrical mixes have fantastic dynamic contrast. You don't necessarily need an enormous amount of sound coming from every speaker at all times. Sometimes less is more. Atmos can sometimes feel too busy. And this is probably the biggest reason I sometimes go back to the original audio. Atmos can make a soundtrack incredibly active. Sounds can move around the room. Background ambience can appear above you. Music can surround you, and it's impressive, but sometimes I find myself thinking, I'm listening to the sound system rather than watching the movie. And that's not what I want. The best movie soundtrack is one you don't think about. You're completely absorbed in the story. You're not sitting there thinking, wow, that helicopter just moved from speaker 7 to speaker 9. You're thinking, what's going to happen next? The cinema memory. There's also something else going on. For many of us who grew up with watching movies on VHS, DVD and Blu-ray, those formats became part of our movie memories. The way a particular movie sounded on your old television, the Dolby Digital logo appearing on the screen, the sound of the DVD player loading the disc, the menus, the opening music, all of it becomes part of the experience. So when a modern release changes the soundtrack dramatically, it can feel unfamiliar, even if the new version is technically superior. And that's why I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I prefer the old mix. Should you actually watch movies on DVD? Now, I'm not suggesting everyone should throw away their 4K discs. Far from it. I love 4K. The best 4K releases can look and sound absolutely incredible. And this is where physical media has a huge advantage. You have choices. You can compare the DVD, you can compare the Blu-ray, you can compare the 4K. You can switch between the original theatrical mix and the new Atmos presentation, and you can decide which one you prefer. Streaming usually doesn't give you that level of choice. The version available today might not be the version available tomorrow. But if you've got the original DVD sitting on your shelf, you own that version. My personal rule. So, here's my rule when it comes to a classic movie. If a new 4K release includes a new Atmos remix, I'm going to try it. I'm going to give it a fair chance. But I'm also going to look for the original theatrical audio. And if I prefer the original, that's the soundtrack I'm using. I don't care if Atmos has more channels. I don't care if the codec is newer. I don't care if somebody tells me the new mix is technically superior. If the original mix gives me the experience I want, then that's the one I'm keeping. The real problem. And perhaps this is the bigger point. The problem isn't Dolby Atmos. The problem isn't 4K. The problem isn't modern technology. The problem is when we start believing that new automatically means better. Sometimes restoration means preserving. Sometimes improvement means changing. And sometimes the best way to experience a classic movie is to hear it the way audiences originally heard it. Not necessarily because it's technically superior, but because it's the movie. Final thoughts. So, next time you put on a classic movie and think the new Atmos soundtrack sounds a little strange, try something. Dig out that old Blu-ray or even that old DVD. Put on the original theatrical mix. Turn the lights down, sit back and see how it feels, because you might discover something surprising. That old DVD you thought you'd outgrown might actually give you the more authentic movie experience. And that, for me, is the real Atmos Trap. So we're focused on having the newest technology. That sometimes we forget why we actually bought the technology for in the first place. To enjoy the movie. And sometimes the old Dolby Digital 5-point track still gets the job done beautifully. But now I want to hear from you. Do you prefer the new Dolby Atmos mixes, or do you sometimes go back to the original theatrical soundtrack? And have you ever bought a 4K specifically for the picture, only to end up switching back to the original audio? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you're a physical media collector who believes that sometimes older really is better, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Give us a thumbs up, because we've got plenty more Blu-ray, DVD, 4K remasters and physical media debates coming your way. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.